Hahaha here. I'm going to bring you some crazy stories about Karens, so click the like button, and without further ado, let's get to the video. It was a normal day for me. I've always been a laid-back guy who likes to live life without too much friction. I woke up early, had my coffee, and decided it was time to go to the market to do my weekly shopping. It was a sunny day, and the weather was perfect for a walk to the market. When I got there, I grabbed a shopping cart and started walking through the aisles, picking up the items I needed. While choosing some fruit, I accidentally bumped into a woman who seemed to be distracted by her cell phone. She dropped some apples from her basket. "Sorry, ma'am. I didn't mean to," I said, quickly bending down to help her pick up the apples. She looked at me with an irritated expression and mumbled something I couldn't understand. I just nodded my head apologetically again and continued with my shopping. I didn't think much about the incident and went on my way. After getting everything I needed, I went to the checkout line. It was a little crowded, so I would have to wait a few minutes. As I waited, I started to hear a loud, clearly angry voice coming from behind me. It was the same woman I had bumped into earlier. She was in line behind me, and to my surprise, she started yelling, "It's him! It's him! Don't you have any shame?" she yelled, pointing her finger in my direction. I was completely confused. Everyone in line started to look at me, and I felt my face heat up with embarrassment. "Excuse me, but what are you talking about?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "You know very well what I'm talking about. You're my lover. And now you're here trying to blackmail me." She continued to yell, her words becoming more and more absurd. I was stunned. I had never seen this woman in my life before today. "Ma'am, I think you're confused. I don't know who you are." "La, you're a scoundrel. I'm going to tell my husband everything. He's going to come after you." She continued to scream, now attracting the attention of practically everyone in the store. I tried to talk to the cashier, who was clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "Please, I just want to pay for my groceries and get out of here. I don't know this woman." The cashier tried to speed up the process, but the woman, who I now realized was a real Karen, wouldn't stop screaming. "You're not leaving here. I'm not going to let you escape." The people around me started whispering among themselves, and I could hear fragments of their conversations. Is he really her lover? Wow, what a situation. I was desperate to get out of there. Finally, I managed to pay for my groceries and started to walk away, but Karen followed me, continuing to scream, "Oh, you're not going to escape. I'm going to call my husband right now." I left the store as fast as I could, my heart racing and my face burning with embarrassment. I couldn't believe what had just happened. It was like a nightmare, a situation so absurd that it seemed like something out of a movie. When I got home, I was still in shock. I told the story to some friends, and they laughed, thinking I was exaggerating or that I had misunderstood. But for me, it had been one of the most embarrassing experiences of my life. For the next few days, I was nervous every time I had to leave the house, afraid that I would run into Karen again or that her husband would actually come after me, believing her lies. I started avoiding that store and shopping elsewhere just to make sure I wouldn't have to go through that situation again. A few weeks passed, and I was starting to forget about the incident and returning to my normal routine. However, one day, as I was driving home from work, I saw a car slow down next to me. My heart sank when I saw Karen in the passenger seat, staring at me. She rolled down the window and with a malevolent smile said, "My husband is looking for you. He won't let this go." My mind began to race. What could I do? I hadn't done anything wrong, but the paranoia of being wrongly accused was consuming me. I told my family what was happening, and they were concerned but didn't know how to help. It was then that I decided to seek legal help. I explained the situation to a lawyer, who advised me to file a police report to protect myself against any false accusations that might arise. I did so, and it gave me a little more peace of mind, but I was still worried. A few days later, as I was driving home from work, I saw a man waiting outside my building. He seemed nervous and was looking around as if he was looking for someone. My heart sank. Could this be Karen's husband? I took a deep breath and decided that I would face the situation head-on. I walked up to him and calmly asked, "Is there anything I can help you with?" He looked me up and down and said, "You're the guy my wife has been talking about. I need to understand what's going on." I explained the whole story, from the beginning at the grocery store to the yelling in the checkout line. I told him how I had never seen his wife before that day, and that it was all a big misunderstanding. The man looked thoughtful, but still suspicious. Why would she do that? It doesn't make sense, he said, still confused. I really don't know. Maybe she's going through some problem or has some personal reason that we don't know about. But I assure you that I have nothing to do with it. I answered honestly. He was silent for a moment, then sighed. I'll talk to her. I just hope this all blows over soon. I nodded and watched him walk away. I felt a huge relief, but I knew that there could still be developments. Fortunately, in the weeks that followed, I had no more problems with Karen or her husband. It seemed that things were finally getting back to normal. That experience taught me an important lesson about how unpredictable people can be and how absurd situations can arise out of nowhere. I also learned the importance of staying calm and seeking help when necessary. And most of all, I became even more attentive and careful in my daily interactions, always trying to avoid any kind of unnecessary conflict. Life went back to normal, and I continue to be the calm guy I always was, but with an incredible story to tell. The memory of that day at the market still made me laugh and tremble a little, but I knew that, in the end, everything had worked out. It was a rainy Saturday afternoon, and I was in my room trying to concentrate on studying for Monday's test. The rain was beating hard against the window, creating a comforting sound that helped me stay calm. But my tranquility was interrupted by a strange sound coming from the basement. Over the years, the basement of our house had always been a place we avoided going. It was dark, damp, and full of old boxes that we never bothered to open. My parents used to say it was just a storage room, but recently, I had noticed that my father spent a lot of time there. Whenever I asked him what he was doing, he would give me vague answers, saying that he was organizing things. I decided to go down and see what was going on. With each step I took, the sound became clearer. It sounded like voices. Reaching the bottom of the stairs, I stopped for a moment and listened carefully. It was my father's voice, but there was another voice, a female one, that I recognized instantly. Karen, our neighbor. My heart raced. What could she be doing here? I took a deep breath and continued down. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I saw a crack of light under the basement door. The voices were louder now, and I could hear their conversation clearly. You have to make a decision. We can't go on like this forever, Karen said, her voice thick with emotion. I know, Karen, but it's complicated. I love my family, my father replied, his voice thick with doubt and sadness. I froze. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My father was cheating on my mother with Karen, and from the looks of it, he had been doing it for a long time. I felt a mixture of anger, sadness, and confusion. I didn't know what to do. My thoughts were racing, and my body didn't seem to want to move. Finally, I decided I had to confront them. I knocked on the door and, with a shaky voice, said, "Dad, what's going on here?" There was a momentary silence, followed by the sound of the door opening. My father appeared with a look of surprise and guilt, while Karen stood right behind him, a panicked expression on her face. "Son, what are you doing here?" my father asked, trying to keep his composure. "I'm the one asking. What are you two doing here?" My voice cracked a little at the end, and I could feel the tears starting to form in my eyes. "It's not what you think," Karen began, but I cut her off. "It's not? Then explain to me what's going on." My father sighed deeply and looked at Karen before answering me. "We didn't want you to find out this way." "Find out what?" "That you've been cheating on Mommy for over 3 years with our neighbor." "I'm so sorry, son. But I love Karen, and things between me and your mother haven't been right for a long time." I felt a knot form in my stomach. "And you think that justifies what you're doing? Why didn't you talk to Mom before? Why cheat? Why here, in our house?" Karen tried to intervene, but I cut her off again. "What about you, Karen? Have you no shame? Have you no respect for our family?" She hung her head, speechless. I couldn't believe what was happening. The basement seemed to be spinning around me, and I had to get out of there. Without another word, I turned and ran back upstairs, tears streaming down my face. In my room, I closed the door and threw myself on the bed, crying. My mind was in complete chaos. How could I face my mother after this? How could I look at my father the same way? And Karen, I didn't know what to think of her. Hours passed as I struggled to make sense of the situation. My father tried to talk to me several times, knocking on the door and asking to come in, but I ignored him. I didn't want to hear anything else from him at that moment. Finally, I heard the front door open and close. I peeked out the window and saw Karen quickly leaving. My father was standing in the doorway, watching her go. He knocked on my door one last time. Son, we need to talk. I slowly opened the door, looking at him with eyes swollen from crying. What do you mean? What else is there to talk about? I'm so sorry. I really am. I never wanted you to find out this way. I'm just as confused as you are. Confused? Are you confused? What about me? What about Mom? I know. I know it sounds unforgivable, and maybe it is. But things between me and your mother have been complicated for a long time. I found comfort in Karen, and it just turned into something more. But now, what do you expect me to do? Pretend like nothing happened? Lie to Mom? I don't know, son. I really don't know. But I need you to understand that I didn't mean for it to be this way. Understand? I can't understand any of this. I need some time to think. My father nodded, looking older and more tired than I had ever seen him. If you need anything, I'll be here. He walked away, leaving me alone again. I sat on the bed, trying to process everything. My head was full of unanswered questions. I knew I needed to talk to my mother, but how could I tell her something like that? The next few days were a blur. My father and I avoided each other, and I could barely look at him. My mother noticed something was wrong, but I just couldn't find the words to tell her. With each passing day, the guilt and pressure grew. Then one night, while we were eating dinner, my mother finally asked, "What's going on? You two are acting weird. Did something happen?" I looked at my father, who avoided my gaze. I knew it was time to tell him the truth. With a shaky voice, I began to speak. "Mom, I need to tell you something." She looked at me, concerned. "What's wrong, honey? What's going on?" I took a deep breath, and with all the courage I could muster, I revealed everything. "I found out that Daddy is cheating on you, with Karen. This has been going on for over 3 years now." The shock and pain in my mother's eyes were almost unbearable to see. She looked at my father, expecting a denial, an explanation. But he just lowered his head, confirming everything. "It's true," he admitted, his voice full of regret. "I'm sorry." My mother was silent for a moment, before getting up from the table and running out of the room, tears streaming down her face. I went after her, but she locked herself in her room. That night was one of the longest of my life. The silence in the house was deafening, and I could barely sleep. The next day, my mother called me to talk to her. She was devastated, but determined to move on. "I don't know what I'm going to do, but I can't go on like this," she said, tears in her eyes. "I need some time to think." The days that followed were difficult. My mother decided to leave home for a while, staying with a friend. My father tried to talk to me several times, but I refused. I was still too hurt to listen to anything he had to say. A week later, my mother returned, stronger and more determined. She and my father had a long talk, and they decided that the best thing for both of them would be to separate. It was a painful but necessary time. Karen moved out soon after, and the house felt emptier without her. I tried to focus on my studies and my life, but the memories of that day in the basement still haunted my mind. Over time, things started to get better. My mother and I supported each other, and our bond became stronger than ever. My father tried to rebuild his life, but our relationship was never the same. I learned a lot from this painful experience. About the fragility of human relationships, about the importance of honesty, and most of all, about the resilience of the human spirit. Life went on, and although the scars never completely disappeared, they served as a constant reminder of strength and the ability to overcome even the most difficult times. I had just bought my new Porsche. It was an impeccable model, with a powerful engine and a design that would leave anyone speechless. Feeling the steering wheel in my hands and hearing the engine roar gave me an indescribable feeling of freedom. However, my joy would be briefly interrupted by a figure I didn't expect to meet: Karen, my aunt's neighbor. It was a sunny Saturday morning when I decided to visit my Aunt Clara. She lived in a quiet neighborhood and always had a cup of coffee ready for any visitor. When I parked my Porsche in front of her house, I noticed some curious looks from the neighbors. After all, it's not every day that you see a car like that driving by. "What a beautiful car!" my aunt exclaimed, coming out to greet me. "You finally decided to show up with your new acquisition." "Oh, Aunt Clara, I had to show you, didn't I?" I replied, laughing. As we were talking, I noticed a familiar figure approaching. It was Karen, my aunt's neighbor, famous in the neighborhood for her peculiar behavior and absurd demands. Karen approached with that air of superiority that was already her trademark. She looked at the Porsche with a sparkle in her eyes that made me uncomfortable. "Hello, Clara," Karen said, completely ignoring my presence. "Who owns this wonderful car?" "Oh, this is my nephew," my aunt replied. "He just bought this Porsche." Karen looked me up and down. I've always wanted one of these. It's practically my dream car." "Yes, it's an incredible car," I replied politely, not quite understanding where she was going with this. "Actually, I was thinking," Karen continued, without even blinking. "I think it would be fair if I drove it. After all, as a woman of privilege, I think I deserve a ride." "Sorry, but I don't think that's going to happen," I replied, trying to remain calm. "It's a new car, and I'd prefer it if I were the only one driving it." Karen looked at me as if I had committed the greatest offense in the world. Her face turned red, and she began to gesticulate wildly. "What do you mean you won't let me drive?" she shouted. "I have every right. I'm a woman of privilege, and I deserve to drive a car like that." My aunt tried to intervene, but Karen was beside herself. She continued to shout, attracting the attention of other neighbors who were starting to come out of their houses to see what was happening. "Look, Karen, I understand that you like the car, but that doesn't give you the right to demand that I let you drive it," she said, trying to be reasonable. "That's absurd," Karen shouted even louder. "You must let me drive it. I demand it." My aunt, already exasperated, tried to calm Karen down. "Karen, please don't do this. He just bought the car. Understand that it's his property, and he decides who drives it." Karen didn't seem to hear her. She continued to scream and demand, while I tried to find a way out of the situation without causing more commotion. That was when the situation reached a critical point. One of the neighbors, Mr. Mario, a burly and intimidating-looking man, decided to intervene. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice deep and firm. "This young man is denying me the right to drive his car," Karen exclaimed, pointing at me as if I were a criminal. "And why should he let you drive his car?" Mr. Mario asked with a raised eyebrow. "Because I'm a woman of privilege," Karen replied, as if that explained everything. Mr. Mario looked at Karen for a moment and then back at me. "Young man, you don't have to let anyone drive your car if you don't want to," he said. "And Karen, you have no right to demand something like that." "But I deserve it," Karen continued to insist. "I have privileges that you can't even imagine." "Privileges or not, that doesn't give you the right to demand someone's car," Mr. Mario replied firmly. Finally, after much screaming and kicking, Karen realized that she wasn't going to get what she wanted. She gave me and Mr. Mario one last look of contempt before turning and marching back to her house, muttering about how unfair people were. My aunt sighed in relief, and Mr. Mario patted me on the shoulder in a friendly way. "Good luck with your car, young man," he said. "And watch out for the Karens of the world." "Thank you very much, Mr. Mario," I replied, still a little dazed by the situation. After the dust had settled, my aunt and I went into her house to have the coffee we had planned all along. We talked about the situation and laughed at Karen's absurd demands. "You handled it well," my aunt said. "It's not always easy dealing with someone like that." "I guess we all have to deal with a Karen every now and then," I said, laughing. But that was definitely one of the worst. The following week, I was still thinking about the incident with Karen. It was hard to believe that someone could have such audacity. However, life went on, and I decided to move on, enjoying my Porsche and the freedom it gave me. But the story was far from over. The following Saturday, I received a call from my aunt. "You won't believe what happened," she began, her voice worried. "What happened, Aunt Clara?" I asked, already imagining that Karen might be involved. "Karen filed a complaint against you with the Homeowners Association," she said. "She's claiming that you insulted her and prevented her from exercising her rights." I was shocked, but not completely surprised. Karen seemed like the kind of person who didn't let anything go unanswered. "And what can we do about this?" I asked, trying to remain calm. "I think we need to go to the association meeting and present our side of the story," my aunt replied. "Are you willing to do that?" "Of course, I'm not going to let this situation go unanswered," I said, determined. The neighborhood association meeting was scheduled for the following week. When we arrived, Karen was already there, looking triumphant. Several neighbors were present, curious to see how the situation would unfold. The president of the association, Mr. Oliveira, called a meeting to order. "We are here to discuss the complaint filed by Ms. Karen against this young man," he began. "Karen, can you tell us your version of the facts?" Karen stood up and began speaking with all the drama she possessed. "This young man was extremely rude to me," she said. "He humiliated me in front of everyone and refused to let me drive his car, something that I, as a woman of privilege, deserve." When it was my turn to speak, I stood up and looked around the room, finding faces both familiar and unfamiliar. "Good evening, everyone," I began. "I want to clarify that at no time was I rude to Karen. I simply refused her request to drive my car, a request that I found absurd. Everyone here knows that a car is personal property, and it is up to the owner to decide who can and cannot drive it." There were murmurs of agreement among the neighbors. Mr. Mario, who was present, also stood up to speak. "I was there, and I can confirm that the young man was polite the entire time," he said. "Karen was the only one who lost control and started yelling." Mr. Oliveira heard both sides and paused before giving his verdict. "It seems clear to me that this was a misunderstanding exacerbated by Karen's reaction," he said. "Everyone has the right to decide who manages their personal property. Karen, your complaint is unfounded." Karen turned red with anger, but she had no more arguments to use. She stormed out of the meeting, leaving everyone present relieved. After the meeting, many neighbors came to congratulate me and offer support. My aunt was relieved that everything had been resolved. "I hope this serves as a lesson to her," my aunt said, "and that we don't have any more problems with Karen." "I agree, Aunt Clara," I replied. "Let's enjoy our coffee in peace." Over time, Karen became more withdrawn and avoided causing more trouble. The situation was a reminder that we need to stand up for ourselves and stand up for ourselves, even when faced with irrational people. And so I continue to enjoy my Porsche and visits to my aunt's house without any more unexpected interruptions. The experience with Karen became a story I would tell at family gatherings, always provoking laughter and reminding everyone of the importance of standing firm in the face of absurdity. And those were today's stories. Click the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any more videos. Until next time. Bye.